Hey everybody, welcome back to my YouTube channel. In this video here, I think you're going to enjoy it. When we're talking about Christmas gifts, everybody's always kind of wanting something unique. They want to get their dad something made. They want to get their brother or their mom or something like that. And coming up with those gifts, a lot of times, you know, we can always do a belt. Belts are always a good deal. But a lot of times we want to make something that we can just, you know, we got a little spare time during Christmas, we can make it, pop it up on Instagram or Facebook or whatever, and it's something people can buy. We don't need a size. We don't need anything like that. These little shave kits are very good for that. These things are, I've been making them for years. They're kind of, everybody's got their own approach to them. Everybody's got a way that they like to make them. This is just kind of it's pretty standard. Everybody makes these things as far as being in leatherwork. If you've done saddle making or leatherwork for any length of time, you've probably made some type of shave kit. This is what some people have called, I've heard it called a bear trap or something, shave kit. It's very simple. It's not super hard. They're really neat, and they are good sellers. A lot of people like them. They've got a lot of room here to do a lot of artwork, personalization. You're going to do somebody's name on there, or brand, or something like that. You got a lot of room on these, and they just have a zipper on them, and you open it up, and it's just a big bucket. That's all it is. It's just a big spot to put all your shave kit, toiletry stuff, your toothbrush, your deodorant, soap, whatever you got when you're traveling. And then I put a little handle on this side here so you can carry it. That's it. And so they're pretty simple. They're a great way if you are making saddles. You've probably got a lot of skirting leather scrap that you're having a hard time getting rid of, unless you have a band knife where you can pull it down and use it for wallets and stuff like that. These things are great this time of year for me to kind of go through my scrap bin, get rid of some scraps, and use some of these pieces somewhere that I may or may not use on a saddle. I mean, at some point you've got more scrap than you can work through. So these things are great for that. I will tell you this, in this video, there is going to be a companion pack for this, and the link's down below in the description. You can go ahead and grab that if you want it. It's not that hard to make a pattern if you want to make it, but it does come with the tooling patterns as well. But in this video, I'm going to show you exactly how I build them from start to finish. We're going to go through and show you that. There's tons of different ways to do these. This is not by any means the only way to do it, but this is the way that I found to do it that makes it just a little bit easier to put together. You can actually hand stitch this bag, or you can buck stitch it. You can do a number of different things. If you don't have a sewing machine, it's not that big to hand stitch. It will take you some time, but you can also buck stitch it too. And a buck stitch one of these looks really, really cool. So there it is, guys. Let's get to the video. I'm going to show you exactly my process for getting this thing made.
Alright guys, so here's our patterns. That's the bottom. These are the sides. You're going to need 2 of these. Disregard those 2 holes. That's my old pattern. But you're going to mark where that bag punch goes. This is the gusset here. Now you can cut this out of any kind of chap leather. But those are the 3 main patterns for this. And I'm using a 13-15 skirting leather, and that's just what I have on hand most of the time as far as scrap leather. So that's what I build them out of. But you could certainly use 10 ounce or even 9 to 10 ounce I've used occasionally, but whatever scrap you've got. And you want to mark where that slot goes. We're not going to cut that to the very end, but we're going to go ahead and mark it. And so as you can see right there, I flipped that pattern. You do have a left and a right based on only where that little bag punch is. You can see that little tick mark right there. That's just for to mark the center of the bag. So you'll see that in the pattern if you do get the companion pack for this. It does have a little cutout right there. That is just to mark the center of there for when you're lining your gusset up, as you'll see in a minute. So that's the only thing that little cutout's for. But there is a left and a right, so be sure and flip your pattern so that the bag punch is on the correct side. So basically you'll have a bag punch on each side in the front of the bag. So you want to be sure when you're cutting that out, flip it to cut the left and the right. And we'll just cut these 2 out with a sharp knife. Now as far as to the bottom I do cut out of a lighter weight leather because we're going to need to fold the sides of it up once we stitch it on. So we're going to cut that out of this right here is 9-10 ounce I believe. So with 13-15 ounce sides, 9-10 ounce bottom, works out pretty good and is easier to sew. Again, you can see those little cutouts. That's just to mark these scribe lines, so you'll see what they're for in just a minute. Now as far as the gusset, again, this is a different color gusset because I forgot to catch the footage for cutting the gusset out, but it's still the same. Any kind of chap leather that you've got, that's a 4/6 ounce glove tan chap leather that I use for leggings. It works really good for that. You could certainly use something lighter, 3-4 ounce nice top grain chap leather. anything that's soft and that's chrome tan that'll glue. You want to stay away from the oil tans. The oil tans tend to be hard to glue and stay stuck, which makes putting it together a little difficult. Now that slot right there, that's where our zipper is going to go on this gusset. So you want to mark that with a pencil. If you're using a chap leather that doesn't mark real well with pencil, you can sure use chalk. Now this little tool, it's just a number 12 hole punch, drive punch that we've ground off one side, so it makes just basically a half moon punch. And I use that just to cut there. You want to cut those holes with that, or you can even use just a big drive punch, and then we're going to cut in between those two holes to make that long slot, and that's where our zipper will go in. On these bags, I usually use a 14-inch zipper, and I get them at Hobby Lobby, somewhere, you know, any craft store will have them, whatever kind of zipper you want to use. But those are the ones that's the length if you're buying a zipper that's pre-made for a certain length. We're just going to cut that out with a nice sharp razor blade. So there's our slot. There's our bottom piece, 9/10 ounce, and our two sides, which are 13/15 ounce. And as you can see, there's a left and a right. See how those bag punches line up there. Just want to be sure you do that. It's not a big deal. They're basically exactly the same. It's just for marking. Now I've gone ahead and drawn and carved a pattern for this example for this video, so I'm gonna go ahead and tap it off onto one side. That's really nice with these little bags. It's real easy just to carve one of them the way you want it and then flop it over and tap it off onto your other one, or you can do floral on one side and then basket stamp on the other. But here we'll just go through kind of what I'm doing as far as, you know, my border. I usually put a little extra wide border on there, so we're going to sew this on a big machine. Again, if you're buck stitching or hand stitching, still looks pretty good if you just leave a little bit wider border than what you normally would. But in the companion pack, those tooling videos, or those tooling patterns, it'll have basically how wide my border is. But we'll just kind of go through and give you a little glimpse of the tooling as we go through on this piece here.
I cling once to a stranger's arms in a home free of sin, hoping I would be freed of that dark that always went. All this drinking life, gateway by and plethora of rum has got me drinking, lying, buying, and dying more than I've ever done. I'm headed to hell, overnight's packed hell, on a one-way track hell, no going back. Help me, for my ride is mostly wrong. me drinking light, buying and dying more than I've ever done. I'm headed to hell, overnight's packed hell, on a one-way track hell, no going back hell, therefore my ride is mostly wrong.
Okay, so on our bottom piece here, where those marks are that we made when we were cutting it out, I'm going to make them a little bit darker here so you can see them in the video. But they're marked on the pattern as well as far as how far in. You just want, I think it's 3/4 of an inch or so, but you're basically just wanting enough to where we can sew those side panels on there. And so I'm going to make a nice long line. I'll usually use my number 8 graphite pencil here just so that that pencil line doesn't show up at the end, but it's nice and dark while we're assembling this thing. And so that's where these side panels will line up on that line and be glued there, and then we'll sew them first, and that'll kind of get the bag started where we can get ready to put the gusset in. And so we're going to edge and slick on the side panels all the way around, and then on the bottom we're just going to edge and slick the ends because that's the only part that's going to show. So we're going to go ahead and do all of our edge slicking and edging right now. And so we'll sand those really good so that the finish is nice. You know, if you're good with your knife and you're cutting these parts out efficiently with a nice sharp blade, you really don't need to sand, but I like to sand even if the cut is clean, just because it kind of cleans up that edge and preps it nice so you get a nice clean shiny edge when you do go to slicking it. So I'm going to edge the top of these side panels with my number 4 heavy edger, and to get a nice, because that leather is so thick, I want it to have a nice edge that's real rounded, so we're going to use a bigger edger there. And I'm going to go ahead and edge and slick all the way around it. I do this because the chap leather you can't hardly edge anyway. Now on this, I'm going to edge the inside. I'm using a number 2. It just, I don't know why, it just kind of cleans up a little bit better, and we are going to be gluing another piece of leather to that area, and so I don't want as rounded of an edge because I want that chap leather to kind of meet up and flow in nicely. And now I'm just going to take my groover and I'm going to groove these so that I have a groove, a nice little groove to stitch in. And like I said, if you're hand stitching, you still want to groove. If you're buck stitching, you wouldn't do this. You would just use a set of calipers and go ahead and mark you a scribe line in there to chisel your holes with. Now if you are going to buck stitch one of these, I do suggest using an awl to make your buck stitch holes, since you're probably going to do that after it's assembled, and you'll see in a little bit how hard that's going to be to use a set of chisels to make those holes for the buck stitching. And so now I'm just going to go through and slick them. Again, my slicking process, it's just water, and then that's just glycerin saddle soap, and then a nice canvas rag. More water and elbow grease than soap. That's my only deal. I just put a little bit of soap on there just to kind of help the fiber start to getting to that good point of their slicking. And I do use a rub stick on heavier leather a lot of times just to get those fibers down nice and smooth. And that stick there, it's just literally a piece of scrap firewood. I was just sitting around and I saw it. We were barbecuing and it looked right, and it's actually really handy. It's got a wider end and then a kind of a pointier end, but it's just a nice piece of mesquite is all it is. But you can make it out of anything, just some kind of hardwood. Just sand it real good so it's smooth.
Dying more than I've ever done. I'm headed to hell overnight.
Okay, so all of our slicking is done now. So these are ready to let the edges dry and dye. But before we do that, we're going to go ahead and wet this bottom piece down, since we're going to be waiting on the edges to dry anyway. And we're going to skive the sides of it. We're going to skive those down so that it folds. So what I'm going to do here is set my calipers on that line that we drew, and so that way I know on the back end how far in I want to skive, because you want your bottom to have full weight, but you want that edge that's going to be sewn to the side panels, you want it feathered down to a nice feathered edge. And so that's just giving me a sight on that side as far as how far in I need to feather that out. And so we're just going to take our safety skiver there and just skive that down. And like I said, I like to take it to a nice feathered edge there along the edge. Now, so we've let these dry, the edges are dry, that bottom panel is dry. Now, we'll say this, a lot of times since you've got to get that so wet to skive those edges down, sometimes that bottom piece will stretch just a little bit. So before I go any further, I like to check and just make sure that I'm exactly the same distance as my side panels. So as you can see there, that one has stretched just a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and put new lines on there and cut one end off, how much ever I need to cut off. And then unfortunately we'll have to edge and slick that edge again and let it dry before we can dye it. But it's just, if you don't think about it and then you get further along, you'll notice that sometimes that the thing is stretched just a little bit, and it'll kind of throw you off and you end up having to cut it after you sew it up anyway. So I just try to catch that right now and go ahead and trim that if there is any. Sometimes it doesn't stretch, but on that one it did stretch on me a little bit. So we'll just get that edged up real quick, and then we'll be right back where we need to be. And put that in front of a fan and let her dry just a little bit. While that's drying, I'm going to go ahead and go to my dye bench, and I'm using a dark brown 5-Bings Pro Oil dye. It's just what I use on all my edges. Any of the oil dyes I'm assuming would work good, but I just take a dauber and dye those edges. You want to be sure your edges are nice and dry when you do this, so that oil soaks in and doesn't sit on top, because if it does, it'll tend to run a little bit, and it may run up on your edge where you don't want it. So just be sure that your edges are nice and dry before you do this. Now here's that zipper. These are the ones that I buy at Hobby Lobby. They're kind of a coil zipper, I think it's called a coil zipper, but any zipper will work. You can sure use a brass YKK zipper if you want, but that's I just buy them already to where they're the right length. They've got the stops on them. They're ready to go. They're not real expensive, and that's a 14-inch zipper, which fits perfectly in that hole off of the pattern if you're using our patterns. And we'll put 2 good coats of glue on the chap leather and on the zipper, and then we'll put that in and get it sewn.
To a stranger's arms in a home free of sin, hoping I would be.
So now our glue is dry, so now we'll go ahead and insert our zipper. That's the best way I've found to do it, is just kind of set it over the top, and that glue is not going to stick just super tight real fast, so you have some time where you can kind of move that around and get it going. You want to leave a little bit of space from the zipper teeth to the edge of the chap leather as you're putting that down, so that pull or that zipper slide can slide nicely past the leather without catching on the leather at all. But just want to be sure it's in there straight. I usually put the stops butted up to the hole there on the left hand side, and then whatever runs up underneath on the right hand side, that works, that's fine. And then we'll just hammer that down real nice and be sure it's stuck good. We'll take that to the machine and sew it. So I'm sewing this on my little 3115 Singer flatbed machine. I do have a roller foot on there, and that does help a little bit, just to where I can kind of get around stuff, and I can get really close to that zipper. I'm sure if you've got any smaller machine, you could certainly sew this on a medium-sized machine, and you wouldn't have to use smaller thread. You could also buck stitch it in there if you wanted to do that. It's just something to keep the zipper in, however you want to sew it, and you can hand stitch it too if you wanted to. But be sure and sew the zipper in before you put it together. I have gotten these things assembled without the zipper actually sewn in before, because I got in a hurry. So just be sure you don't skip this step. It's kind of a pain in the butt if you sew it up and figure out that you never sewed your zipper to your chap leather. so just be mindful of that. And we'll just cut all our stitches. And I overstitch all of my stitches, so a lot of times some people have asked me why I'm not tying them off, but I overstitch at least 3 or 4 stitches, so then I just cut them off flush, and that should lock that stitch down. Now we'll go back to our bottom piece that's dry now on the edges, and we'll go ahead and just edge those ends, or dye those ends so that they're nice and dyed. I'm doing all my dyeing now because that chap leather doesn't dye very well and tends to run, so I want to dye all my panels before I put them together. Now we're ready to assemble our 3 pieces, the bottom and the 2 sides. We're just going to put glue along the bottom edge of those 2 side panels and along the side edges of that bottom piece where our marks are. And I use 2 good coats. And then once they've dried, then we'll go ahead and glue our side panels to our bottom piece, lining it up with those pencil lines that we drew along the side edge there. Just be sure when you're lining these up, sometimes when you're tooling them, especially if you're doing basket stamp, those side panels may stretch a little bit, so just be sure you kind of bend them around and get them where you need them on that pencil line. That's very important. And then I like, as usual, hammer down our glued area there to make sure we get a good adhesion. And now we're going to sew it. I'm sewing it on my big machine, which is basically a Juki. It's an old Ferdco. And I'm just going to sew that bottom in there. And all we're doing is just sewing the bottom edge and sewing it to the bottom panel.
Back help me for my ride is mostly wrong.
So now we've cut our stitches and everything, the bottom stitch to the side panels. Now I'm just going to take a sponge and wet that edge right there where that sewing is. We're going to wet that leather because we're going to get this thing shaped and get a nice crease on the bottom. And I'm just pushing that over and then lightly hammering where I want that seam so that bottom panel touches the bench. That'll give you a good crease. You could certainly, some guys will groove along that original line that we drew on the back side. They'll use a groover. I don't have good luck with groovers, and I found that just feathering it down to a nice feathered edge and then bending it, wetting it and folding it like that, I don't really miss the groove. So that's the only reason I don't do it. You could certainly groove it. If you feel more comfortable using a groover and putting a nice groove in there, you can certainly do that. But as you can see there, I've got a nice crisp bend in my material, and it's nice and square. So I just opt not to use a groover. And so now we'll put that in front of a fan to kind of speed its drying time. Now that it's dry, we've come back, that bottom edge is dry. I'm going to take my pattern again because sometimes your mark is lost. Remember, we marked that when we cut that deal out. But what we want to do is mark the center, and just a little tick mark right there in the middle. That's going to help to line up our gusset as we glue the gusset into this thing and finish the assembly of it. I want to be sure I know where the exact center is, because we're going to work from the center out, and that'll ensure that your zipper is centered and everything is where it needs to be and the bag is square. So I'm just going to measure the zipper slot and find center on that and put a chalk mark or a pencil mark, whatever marks best. And that piece of chalk didn't mark very good, but just put a mark on there so you know where center is. Okay, so now what we're going to do is go ahead and glue. We're going to put glue on the actual body of this thing. We're going to put glue all the way around the edge, just along the edge. So now it's basically all one piece, and so we're going to go all the way around and put a good coat of glue just along the edge. And I do put 2 coats on these. I usually put 2 coats on everything. Now here you're going to glue pretty far in on the ends because we're going to gain a lot whenever we go to put this together. We're going to push that up inside there. So now our glue is dry, and so we've got center of our gusset, and we've got our center marks on our side panels that we made, and the glue's ready to go. So we're just going to try to line those 2 up and start in the middle. So you'll just line those, the center of the zipper basically with that center mark on your side panel, and work your way out on each side. Don't worry about the bottom yet. Just get the top edge as it turns down. Start gluing that together and just kind of pinching it together as you go. And we'll deal with the bottom end here in just a second. But you want to go out from the center on each side and make that turn nice and clean. Just kind of stretch and bend your chap leather, and this, if it's good chap leather and soft, it should bend very easily. Then we'll come to the other side and we'll pick middle up, start in the middle where our mark is, and the middle of where on our side panel that we made, and line those two up. If all those marks are correct, your zipper should be centered and the panel will be glued up square, so the whole bag will be square and it'll sit flat, nice and square. And so we do the same to this side as we did the other. Just work our way out from center and start going down on the sides, not worrying about the bottom yet. And be sure and pinch those together real good once you've got them where you want them, and that'll hold through the rest of this before we get a good hammer on there, because we'll hammer those edges down to make sure that glue's stuck really good. Now here's we do the bottom. We're going to start pushing that down, lining up the edge all the way till you get to that corner. Once you get to that corner, you want to start pushing that gusset as far in as you can, as long as it's pleasing, but you've got to gain some. You don't want to glue that edge to where it's really tight and you have little room right there off of the bottom. You want to push on the bottom, you want to push that gusset in towards the bag some to give you a little bit of room, especially if you're sewing it on a sewing machine, because the bottom arm of that machine is going to need space. And you'll notice this, if you've got it too tight, you'll notice that you don't have enough room for the machine to fit inside there, because we're going to sew this bag basically upside down. And so you want to push that a little bit further in there. That's why I glued so far in like I did. And you can see how much excess you have. So you've got plenty to work with, so just play with it. You see how far in that is? It's not really, it kind of pushes in towards the bag there on the bottom. See how far in it is? That just gives you a little bit more room on your machine when you're sewing it on the machine. Like I said, if you're sewing it by hand, I would still do this just because it's going to give you a little bit more space. But we'll do the other side the exact same way. Mostly wrong. And you can see right there, I am lining up the gusset along the edge with very little feather all the way till I get to that corner. And then once I get to that corner, I just kind of start pushing it towards the inside of the bag a little bit, and not trying to line the edge of the gusset up with the edge of the bag by any means, but just pushing it in enough to where I've got a little bit of room in there along the bottom. So it almost kind of makes a weird turn and tries to bunch up a little bit on the end. That's fine as long as it's flat along the edge. We're going to cut all those wrinkles off once we sew it. We just want to have plenty of room in there. So now we'll just take our hammer and hammer down our edges really good. Be sure you don't have any wrinkles right in there, since it does kind of bunch up. Just be sure and smooth any wrinkles out, and pull it up and reset it if you need to, but get it nice and smooth, and you won't see any of that gather after you sew it and trim off the excess. And so I like to hammer those edges down really good. And again, be sure you're not using like a oily chap leather or a real sticky chap leather, because it won't glue really well, and then you're gonna have trouble with that gusset trying to walk on you when you get to the machine. And there, I'm gonna go ahead and trim that excess off. Dying more than I've ever done. I'm headed to hell. Overnight's packed hell on a one-way track. Hell, no going back. Hell. Okay, so now we're going to put this on the machine, and we're going to go ahead and sew. I start right there at the bottom corner and go ahead and set my machine there and start sewing. It sometimes, depending on how sturdy that corner is, you might have to kind of bend and squash down that corner a little bit to get it in your machine if you are sewing it on a machine, or at least mine. But then once you get started, then you're just going to sew from corner all the way around to the other corner. Now you should, if you've got, like I said, a nice soft chap leather that glued well, this should be very easy to sew. There's plenty of room on the bottom end. You're not right along the edge where the gusset's trying to push the material out from your machine. So you should be able to just sew right around there. The only tricky part, like I said, is when you get down to that corner, you might have to kind of flatten that corner out, as you'll see me do right there. I have to kind of stretch and squash that corner down just a little bit to get right up where I need to be. And then I'll sew right there, and then I'll back stitch a few stitches, and that'll finish off one side. And then we'll do the exact same thing to the other side. And we're going to sew the bottom area of the gusset separately. So there's actually 4 little sewing areas whenever you're assembling these, instead of trying to sew it all at one time and you've got to jump off those side panels onto the bottom. I just tend to usually have a lot more trouble doing that. So this is the best way that's worked for me. So
Hoping I would be free of the dark that always went. All this drinking life, gateway buying, plethora of wrong has got me drinking life, buying and dying more.
So now here on the bottom, we're just going to put that in, kind of have to do the same thing. I usually try not to get too close to that side panel right there. It doesn't hurt anything if there's a little space without a stitch right up against that corner. There's no way it's going to come open, but I can only get so close with that dump truck size presser foot system that I have on this particular machine. So I just get as close as I can to where I can stitch it cleanly. I'd rather have no stitches than nasty watered up looking stitches. So but I just sew one line there along the edge, kind of the same spacing when I come to the other side panel like that, and then back stitch, and that side's done. And then we'll do the exact same thing to the other side. Now here we'll just trim our stitches, and as you can see, that gusset's sewn in, the bottom's flat, the bag set's flat, square. If you did everything right to this point, like I said, lining up your centers on your gusset and your side panels, and using good glue and everything, your gusset shouldn't have walked anywhere or moved around, and the bag should be relatively square. Now I'm just going to come in with a razor blade and just trim any little bit of overhang that I might have that's excessive of my my chap leather gusset, especially right there in that corner. And those corners, I want to be sure that they're nice and clean. I don't have a lot of material overhanging right there, and sometimes you'll end up with a little bit more than you intended to, so it's not a big deal. Just trim it off. Just be careful of your nice slick dyed edges there, and try not to trim any of that off, or you'll have to kind of touch those up.
Wrong has got me drinking, lying, buying, dying.
Now the nice thing with chap leather on these is that you can just trim using a nice heavy edger. And so I'm just going to go around, instead of trying to trim it all with the razor blade, I just get those corners with the razor blade. Then I'll come in with my nice heavy number 4 edger and just edge that chap leather off. And it usually, sometimes chap leather gets a little fuzzy and nasty when you trim it, but if you've got a nice sharp edger and a little bit bigger edger, you can see it takes it right off, and it'll kind of tie it in really nice with the edges that you've already slicked, prepped, and dyed. And so I just use that and to trim that off. And just be real careful. You want to be sure that your edger is nice and sharp, because chap leather usually doesn't edge very well. So just be sure you've got a nice, good, sharp edger.
Help me with my time. I'm headed where I can't get lucky, and the dealer, he's always blind. I'm headed to hell. My overnight's packed hell, on a one-way track hell. No going back, help me for my...
So now we're going to punch those bag punches. I use a 3/4 inch bag punch here. And if you can't see them after this point, if you still can't see your marks because they've rubbed off or something, you can always remark them with your patterns. But I try to get it on the corner and just shove it up in there. That's another reason why you want to push that gusset kind of more towards the inside of the bag, there at the bottom when you sew it, so you can kind of get the corner of your bench up inside there. And I'll just go through there and use that 3/4 inch bag punch and punch those slots through the side panel body and the gusset all at one time. That's why we don't punch them until now. It's just one easy step, just boom, punch right through there. And there's our slots for our handle. Now I like to take and just kind of mist that bag down just a little bit, since we've got to make the handle now. It can have time to dry, but I just give it a light misting, and then we're just going to do a little bit of shaping. I just try to get it kind of bent. I like a little bit more of a bent top like that. It just kind of looks a little bit more pleasing, and so I just kind of mist it down and shape it up, and just kind of straighten anything up from bending and sewing. And so now that the actual bag itself is ready to go. Now all we like is the handle. So after that's dried, we're going to go ahead and oil it. This one here, I just did a dark oil on it. I didn't do any antiquing. You can antique, you can paint, you can do all your dye work. Do all that right after you tool it before you start assembling this thing. It's a lot easier. But on this particular bag, I just did a dark oil finish with tan coat, and so I just opted to do it all after the bag was put together. But if you're going to do any dye work or antiquing or anything, do that before you start assembly. So now we're going to cut out our strap. I just cut it out of either 5/8 or 3/4 inch 9/10 ounce like belt weight leather, and I cut it 12 inches long, and then we're just going to end punch the ends of that. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to do on this one just a little finger carving, swivel knife cuts, but you could sure do a border stamp or anything like that. And if you feeling really creative, you could sure fully tool that little handle, and you can make the handle shaped if you want or whatever. But the pieces that go through, remember we made a 3-inch or 3/4 inch bag punch, so the ends have to be that. But the length of it is 12 inches, and then I'm just doing some knife work on it just to kind of dress it up a little bit.
That dark that always went, all this drinking light, gateway by and plethora of wrong has got me drinking.
And so now I'm just going to take a number 2 edger and edge all the way around this thing, all 4 sides, and then we'll slick it too, and then let it dry, and then oil it and finish it. Give it whatever finish the rest of the bag has, and it'll be ready to mount to the bag. That's about it for the handle. It's fairly simple.
Help me, for my ride is mostly wrong. Lord, would you even take the time to help my poor lost soul?
So now our handle has been dried and oiled. Now we're just going to mount it to the bag, and I just run it through the bag punches that we made. The bag has been completely finished and bag coated or tan coated and everything, and so it's ready to go. And I just run it through there and fold it over, and I use a rivet there. You could sure do some type of tied closure with a piece of leather lace or anything else you want, but I just use a copper rivet, and so I just fold it over and make my marks, or punch my holes, and then just flip it to the other side so I know how far apart those holes need to be for the rivets.
Back, help me, for my ride is mostly wrong.
So we're just going to set that first rivet on the strap. First one's a little easy because it lays nice and flat. The second one is bent around, and so you've got more of the bag and the handle in your way, but you just got to kind of work around it. You can get them set really easy.
Drinking light by wrong.
So there's our handle. So now for the zipper, I always like to put just a little leather bleed on the zipper pull, just so you got a little bit more to grab onto when you're going to open it and get your stuff out, or when you're using the bag. So it just makes it a little bit, adds a little finishing touch. So this is just a 4/6 ounce Latigo lace leather, and so I'm going to cut it. I think I cut this one about 3/16, somewhere around there, and I'm just going to cut it and bevel it on my strap cutter here, and then just make a nice little bleed and put it on the zipper pull.
Freed of that dark that always went. All this drinking light, gateway by and plethora of wrong has got me drinking, lying, buying, and dying more than I've ever done. I'm headed to hell. Overnight's packed hell, on a one-way track hell, no going back. Help me, for my ride is mostly wrong. Lord, would you even take the time to help my poor lost soul? I've been wrong for some time now, but you got to help me grow. Throw me a quarter, help throw me a dime. Please help me with my time. I'm headed where I can't get lucky, and the dealer, he's always blind. I'm headed to hell. Overnight's packed hell, on a one-way track hell, no going back. Help me, for my ride is mostly wrong.
Alright guys, so that's our video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope I made everything clear enough in there. If there's something I missed, or you don't know exactly what I did in a certain area, shoot me an email and let me know. I sure hope I didn't leave anything out. That's the process. When it comes to the antiquing and stuff, like I mentioned in the video, you can antique, you can dye, you can two-tone, you can paint, do all that. Do all that stuff before you start assembling this thing. It'll be a lot easier. I have painted them and antiqued them and everything after they're done, but it's just kind of a big wad of thing you've got to move around. And so do all your, like anything else, do all your dye work and your paint work before you get it assembled, while it's separate pieces. As far as a gusset, you can use whatever you want. Like we said in there, I mean, you can use, I've seen this done with Latigo, real thin lace Latigo works good. Anything that's soft that you can get up in here, and so that you can get it all to form around and shape really well. But anyway, that's it. You know, they're shave kits. They're really good money makers. You know, you can make the whole thing pretty much out of all your scrap from your saddle. Because I build the sides out of the 13-15 skirting leather. So you don't have to use that, but I got a lot of that scrap, so that's what I use. It gives it a little bit more stability. If you make a lot of chaps, you've certainly got a lot of chap leather laying around you can't do anything with. Perfect for this kind of stuff, for the gusset in this. So anyway, give one a shot. No matter where you're at, if you're just starting out in leatherwork, it's a great little step-up project that can kind of stretch you a little bit and kind of get your mind around, working with your materials and your tools in order to get a bag put together. Enjoy the process. Like I said, they're great Christmas gifts. If you got a couple customers that are just wanting you to brainstorm and come up with something for a Christmas gift for somebody special for them, throw one of these at them. These are really good. They're really good projects. So, but as always, I really appreciate you listening, watching the channel, following me, subscribing, liking it. and following us on our website and Instagram. Said if you want to contact me, be sure to shoot me an email or hit me up on Instagram. Just let me know if I can help you in any way. And if, like I said, if we didn't answer anything in here or something particularly right, you know, or you missed something in there, don't quite understand, just shoot me an email and let me know. We will be moving our shop right after Christmas, and so I'll be sure to be posting some Instagram photos of that move. We're going to have to break all this down and pack it up and move it, and I've got to be out of here by January the 15th. We've got a new building that's going to be a little bit closer to my house, a little bit better setting and stuff, and I'm hoping to have it set up a little bit easier, to have some in-house workshops and stuff where you can come to the shop and, you know, we can spend a day together or something like that, or a weekend for a project class. We really appreciate the support and all the feedback we've been getting, and of course, you know, you guys are enjoying the patterns, so we'll continue to do that. Hopefully lots and lots more patterns next year, and more classes and everything like that. So thank y'all so much for watching the channel. If you like it, subscribe, mash the like button, give me some feedback, let me know that you're out there. I appreciate y'all. If you have any questions, let me know. Go spend some time with your family. Enjoy your Christmas season. Don't work till midnight at Christmas Eve. That's not any fun. Get your work done early. Start putting in those longer days now so that you're not rushed at the end when it comes to Christmas. Go spend some time with your family. Merry Christmas, everybody. Thank y'all.